Welcome to Sleeping Bear National Lakeshore. Established on October 21st of 1970, Sleeping Bear National Lakeshore extends along 35 miles of shoreline on beautiful Lake Michigan. The park has two islands as well, North and South Manitou, giving the park a total of 71,199 acres of protected lands. The area was formed during the last glacial period 10,000 to 14,000 years ago, giving Sleeping Bear some of the most beautiful landscapes in America. It was even recognized in 2011, where it won the title of the most beautiful place in America from Good Morning America. Glen Haven Village is one of the main draws to the park. With so much to see at Sleeping Bear National Lakeshore, there is no way we can cram it all into one 10 to 15 minute long episode and do it justice. So this will be our first multi-episode stop. And I know what you're thinking, how are you going to film enough footage in such a short time? Well, I volunteered at the park the entire season, so we have plenty of time to get footage as well as the history of the park. But before we get into the U.S. Life-Saving Station, the blacksmith shop, and more, we need to establish some of the early history of Glen Haven. By the 1950s, steamship traffic was at an all-time high on the Great Lakes. They carried passengers and freight from Buffalo, New York, all the way to Chicago. The Manitou Pass, consisting of Sleeping Bear Bay and South Manitou Island, were the first natural harbors between Chicago and the Straits of Mackinac, providing perfect harbors for the steamships to stop and refuel with cordwood. Glen Haven became a significant port town and was shaped by the fortunes and misfortunes of just three men. Charles McCarty was one of the original founders of Glen Haven. Between 1858 and 1870, McCarty acquired approximately 2,000 acres of land. It was mostly used for logging cordwood for the steamships traveling through the Manitou Passage. In 1864, he built the dock, making loading and unloading of goods and passengers much easier. Around the same time, he built the inn, or as it was known then, as the Glen Haven Hotel. He built a sawmill on nearby Little Glen Lake and purchased a tugboat to move the cordwood, freight, and people much easier. McCarty expanded his empire too fast and became financially overextended, and sold his holdings to the Northern Transportation Company. Philo Chamberlain founded the NTC, which was one of the most successful steamship lines on the Great Lakes. Before McCarty's financial woes began, in 1867, Chamberlain began buying up land in Glen Haven. He envisioned a massive commercial and transportation route from the east to the west, utilizing steamships on the Great Lakes, as well as using rail lines. In 1870, shortly after the acquisition of McCarty's holdings, the NTC too became overextended, trying to expand far too quickly. The Vermont Railroad took over operations as the NTC began to restructure. However, in 1871, a massive fire destroyed all the cordwood and all the buildings in Glen Haven, with the exception of the inn, the general store, and the dock. The following year, the dock was heavily damaged during a storm. In 1877, Chamberlain brought in David Henry Day to help run the business. In March of 1886, Chamberlain suddenly passed, leaving his assets to his son-in-law, William Butler. Butler conveyed his assets to D.H. Day and some to Day's sister. By 1890, D.H. Day, through various avenues, acquired most of the property in Glen Haven, though reports at that time stated that Day didn't appear to have the resources to acquire so much land. How he did it is still a mystery today. D.H. Day began the D.H. Day Company as a lumber operation supplying cordwood and producing hardwood lumber from the sawmill to the Glen Haven dock. On December 29th of 1889, D.H. Day married to a much younger Eva Farron. The Farron family managed the Sleeping Bear Inn. Day and his wife Eva lived above the general store and had 9 children. Day improved life in Glen Haven by building a 50-foot ice skating and curling rink, as well as tennis courts. By the early 1900s, while Edison was lighting up a few major cities like New Jersey, Day was amazed by such an invention, so he bought a generator from the Edison Company, wire and light bulbs, and by 1905, Glen Haven had electricity. Day wanted to make sure that all his employees had a good night's sleep so they could be productive the next day at work. So at 9 p.m., he turned the generator off. His town, his rules. All the clear-cut logging done in the area left their cash crop industry bare. Day could have cashed out and left Glen Haven, but instead, with only 5,000 acres left to log, he decided to stay and diversify. Just south of Glen Haven, he built a massive farm. Day knew the sandy soil in the area was no good for crops, so he traveled back to his home state of New York, and when he returned, he brought with him 5,000 cherry trees, as well as apples, peaches, and pear trees. If you've ever wondered why Traverse City is known as the cherry capital, you can thank D.H. Day for introducing cherries to the region. He also grew hay and corn, had over 400 hogs, and 200 Holstein dairy cows. Today, the massive white barn and Victorian-style house still stands. It is on private property and not owned by the park. In the mid-1920s, Day, with his son David Jr., established the Glen Haven Canning Company. Its shoreline location next to the dock was perfect, so the canned fruits could be shipped out along the Great Lakes. While many small towns in the region became ghost towns as the lumber industry dried out, Day believed Glen Haven could become a tourist destination as well. He donated 32 acres along Lake Michigan to the state. He did this so the state could establish the D.H. Day State Park, which was the first state park in Michigan. While that state park is no longer there, most of the former park is home to the D.H. Day campground. The old log cabin style station still exists. In 1922, Day sold a large portion of his land that included Alligator Hill for a real estate development called Day Forest Estates. An 18-hole golf course was built, land for an airstrip and clubhouse was cleared, roads graded, and some parcels even sold. However, the Great Depression settled in and hit the area hard, putting a halt on all future development. Today, the stone wall entry points with the Day Forest Estates still sit along the former entrances. The golf course tried to hold on, but several years later, it closed as well. You can still see the areas where the now overgrown fairways used to exist. D.H. Day passed in 1928 at the age of 76. His wife Eva lived in Glen Haven until 1936. By the mid-1970s, the National Park Service had purchased the entire Glen Haven village and surrounding lands. The inn closed in 1972 and stood in a state of natural decay until 2021, when the nonprofit organization called Balancing Environment and Rehabilitation, aka BEAR, obtained an historical lease on the inn, opening its doors once again after an extensive restoration, making the Sleeping Bear Inn the oldest inn in the National Park Service. Many structures are open seasonally, offering visitors a glimpse at the history of Glen Haven. So, there you have the Cliff Notes version of the history of Glen Haven. I don't feel like I could have done episodes on Sleeping Bear National Lakeshore without you knowing the backstory. Join us next week when we tour the Glen Haven Canning Company. Thank you so much for watching and for your support.